Go4Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Hello and welcome for today's Go4Leadership podcast. My guest today is Daniel Friedmann.
Go4Leadership interviews.
Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Daniel, like always, we ask our guests to give us a 30 seconds glimpse or introduction of themselves.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my name is Daniel Friedmann. I'm working at Bosch Power Tools, and I've been part of a large transformation of the whole Power Tools division. I was guiding the transformation of one of the business units as an agile coach with a coaching team, and we're implementing there an agile scaled framework. And in the meanwhile, I'm still working as an agile coach, but besides that, I'm also freelancing and supporting also other companies with my learning, so to say, I gained through the transformation at Bosch Power Tools, and support especially management teams to encounter agile working and live up to the principles they are preaching, more or less.
I like that last statement, Daniel. So, I mean, in this regards, of course, it is for me quite relevant and important to understand what is for you leadership, or what does leadership mean to you in order to get a better understanding?
I think leadership changed a lot, or the meaning of leadership, especially when you work in an agile environment. And I think there are a lot of trainings and leadership principles defined around agile working or agile leadership. I think the most important thing is a clear behavioral change when you're a leader coming from a very transactional leadership style, which is quite common in normal larger corporations. There's an extreme change required, especially in mindset, but also really which methodologies you're using. And leadership is not only like acting like a servant leader and being a little bit more open for feedback. For me, it also means that you're really very disciplined in applying the agile methods, which maybe probably are also used on working level. And I think most leaders miss that fact. They bring down agile working to a mindset topic, but not really like an operational daily working topic. And I think new leadership is like a sport that has to be trained on all levels, especially also management has to change a lot and train in a very disciplined way the new ways of working. And that comes down to clear methodologies which are available. It's probably not Scrum, but other more agile or more management tools. But leadership for me is really something that has to be completely newly interpreted currently.
I like that, and I think I want to start. Let's get started. Let's say with the statement of your introduction that leaders many times break the rules of maybe the new methods. Maybe you can give us a glimpse on why you have made that statement and what makes you believe, let's say, that there are so many leaders out there that are breaking the rules and not following, let's say, what they may do.
I think it's maybe, I don't want to do any management bashing here, but it's an observation I did in a couple of companies now. And I think the leadership teams oftentimes have a very good intention. They kick off an agile transformation. Maybe after they have been on a zoo tour in Silicon Valley, they have seen some cool startups in the States, which are already agile organizations and working as a whole organization in an agile way. They are enthusiasts. They can bring this message back home to their companies and start this transformation. And I think there's a big misconception, because what happens most of the time, they kick off this transformation and expect that the working level starts working with agile tools, and they can observe it like an experiment from an ivory tower. Yeah. And most of the time, their involvement is just reduced to some inspirational speeches. They motivate the organization to go into this direction because there's a VUCA world outside, a lot of disruptive competition happening. Maybe in 10 years, we're eaten up by some startups. And then they watch this experiment on working level and want to assess if it's successful or not. But they miss the fact that this self-organized, empowered teams on working level can only be successful if they are also guided and led in the right way by the leadership team. Mm-hmm. And that's only possible when also leadership changes tremendously the way they are leading the organization. Normal management teams, most of the times, do what they did before. They define their strategies in glossy PowerPoint slides with great visions. But those PowerPoint slides stay too vague and too high fly to really give the guidance to the self-organized teams on working level, which leads to the fact that most of the self-organized teams at some point lose track. They do something in the self-organized way and run off topic, so that the top management has to intervene and micromanage again. And this kills this agile idea right in the beginning. Yeah, so it's a contradiction in itself that self-organized teams suddenly are overruled again by top management, which is micromanaging. And this oftentimes kills this agile pilot projects right in the beginning. And for a lot of organizations, it's then a proof that agile working is not fitting to their organization, which is a complete wrong interpretation, I would say. They just didn't start doing it right because management was probably not really providing the right corridor, the right alignment for the self-organized teams. And this comes down to my introductory statement. Management has to really also learn to work in an agile way and eat their own dog food, if you will. Yeah. And in my work as a coach, I always start top down in this transformation to coach, especially the executive teams, the management or the C-suite, if you will, and hammer then with the agile principles and agile working methods. So they apply it first, act as a role model, and then the organization can really recognize changes in their behavior and feel that they are more empowered, that there's a kind of trust which is given to them by the management teams, while there's still a very clear alignment what they are supposed to do, what are the expected results. And in this combination, giving this autonomy on the one hand side, but also giving the alignment, a leadership team can provide the right context that self-organized teams can really excel and deliver the results which are expected.
I like your statement you made that it's not wrongly intended, but it's maybe just wrongly executed, like you also outlined very well. I'm questioning myself. Do you think that has to do more on the mindset side, or is this root cause more to find on the let's say method skills that maybe are not really there? Because I have been part of such a journey, going let's say to San Francisco, seeing a fancy startup and say, wow, that's bam, that's fantastic, let's go there, let's do and copy that. But of course it's not also just the right statement to copy it, right? It's your own their own needs, what is required from an organizational perspective. But I'm asking myself, has it to do with the mindset, or maybe just also with the skills and the method skills that are required to do it the right way?
That's a fantastic question. And I have a very bold statement or answer to that one, and I'm very black and white. But for me, mindset and the other topic, applying the right skills and methodologies, goes hand in hand. It's two things you can't deal with in a separate way. But this is a mistake a lot of companies do. I also have been part of a lot of leadership trainings and agile leadership principles, which have been promoted throughout the organization I'm working in. And these are fantastic workshops or offsite seminars you do, and you are motivated and inspired by Daniel Pink and Simon Sinek videos, when they talk about the golden circle and that kind of things. But when you go back home or when you go back to work on the next working day, you are again soaked up by your normal daily work and you forget about all what you've learned. And it's not just that you forget it, you're just not able to make this transfer in your actual operational working every day. It's so tough to act really upon those principles. Yeah? And it's also something I not recognized in my own work, but I saw that a lot with all other colleagues that actually intended to do something different, but in the end, they swapped back to their old traditional behavior. So my take on that one is also management needs extreme strict coaching. And this is something I see very seldomly. You see a lot of agile coaches in organizations which are dealing with the teams. You see very few top management coaches which can really coach on eye level top managers in the C-suite. Because coaching is also really being strict and slapping fingers and having the mandate to slap the fingers of somebody and really enforce a behavioral change. And that's exactly what you said. It has to do with the skills you have to be trained in. It has to do with the methodologies you have to be very strict about. You should really follow the book in the beginning and learn it. And there a coach has to supervise you and really enforce this new behavior and show you in a daily situation how you now could act in a new way. And this leads then to an experience you have where you say, wow, with this behavioral change, this feels actually quite good to me. I recognize if I give more leeway to my team, they suddenly take on the responsibility. They come up with own solutions. They deliver the results I expect without telling them what they exactly have to do, this kind of things. And with these experiences, suddenly a mindset change happens in the leader's mind, so to say. And if a couple of leaders are changing their mindset, suddenly the culture changes. Yeah. So for me, there's a clear causality. You can't just train a mindset and besides of that, train a little bit methods. It's a clear link. You have to first learn what to do and act upon the new principles, and then slowly your mindset changes as well. But there's a first and a second step in that one. You can't do this in parallel or completely separate.
I totally agree. You also mentioned that it's a sport, and I think that goes along with the statement you made that you need to have a coach, a trainer, supervisor, let's say, that always put the salt on the wound to say, no, that's not the right thing you should do now. But I think there's also a lot of fear and uncertainty, right? A change, we are human beings. Change is not, I mean, there's, I would say, nobody out there that loves change per se. So how do you argue in your work, how do you overcome that fear of change, and that the people really are open for that journey, let's say, a journey that also hurts? I mean, it's of course often, in particular in C-suite leadership teams, hard to let's say to put the salt on the wound and say, no, it's not the right way. Like you said, you need somebody on eye level to give that feedback, and also people that accept and are open for the feedback.
Absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned a very important point. There's a kind of anxiety of certain target groups or groups in the organization when it comes to agile and to these behavioral changes I mentioned. And I think especially middle management, top management fears this behavioral change or this agile working, which oftentimes goes along with flatter or reduced hierarchies, with less disciplinary reporting lines, less status symbols. Yeah, a lot of organizations, like also Bosch, eliminated all the offices. You don't have this typical offices of your boss. You have to go to, everybody sitting in an open floor, and there's an open floor policy. You don't even have a dedicated working space. And there's a lot of fear and skepticism around all those topics, because people in the typical corporation, they earn the status symbols throughout their career. So by each hierarchy level they get something on top. You get a company car, you get your own office, you get your secretary, whatsoever. And if you take all that away, it's quite obvious that a lot of people are kind of at least surprised how they now should, how their work, how their position should be appreciated. And that's it's sometimes even justified, this fear, because a lot of top managers are rather administrators, but not experts in what they're doing.
Absolutely.
And expert, I don't mean that you have to have a very big functional depth, but at least you have to have a breadth of knowledge. If you want to steer a certain area or department, maybe a cross-functional team, you at least have to have a good overview and the seniority to understand what's going on. And a lot of leaders suddenly recognize, wow, now that I'm not the transactional leader anymore, who's just administrating the work and micromanaging here and there, what's my role now? And then you have a change from a power hierarchy to a competence hierarchy, how I call it. And suddenly leaders have to ask themselves, wow, what's my competence? What's my justification that I'm earning double the money like others? And there's kind of also a transparency suddenly that what is this leader actually doing? Which value add does he give in discussions, in escalations? Is he really a strong leader? Can he inspire and motivate team to strive for a joint target or vision? Yeah. So there are a couple of leadership skills suddenly emphasized and much more important that were probably not even relevant in the state or current state. And for maybe just a small excursus in my personal experiences, when we started as an agile team, I was a normal project manager. I had a cross-functional team. We should try out agile working in hardware development. And we recognized quite quickly after 2-3 weeks that we can't do this just with a 2-day training on agile and design thinking. That's something you have to really learn on a daily basis. So the first good decisions we as a team made, we hired a coach. And this coach was so strict, we actually really didn't like him. It was a very good coach. We didn't like him. He was giving us a tough time. Yeah? It's like when you go to a fitness gym, you want a coach who's kind of drilling you to do one more exercise and not be very friendly to you and say, hey, great, you're perfect. But it was tough. It was tough to have somebody supervising you on a daily level, giving you feedback all the time. And this also led to the fact that my team was also complaining after a short while. They said, hey, Daniel, this coach doesn't fit to us. He doesn't understand how we are working in our company. And I said, let's go on. I mean, let's put this pressure on us and you as a team. So I want you to change. But then on a certain day, it suddenly also got tough for me because this coach said, now we're going to push the king off the throne. Mm-hmm. We're going to distribute the power of Daniel to all the other teammates. Yeah. And I remember that I was also going home that night to my wife and said also at the evening or at our dinner table, I'm not sure if this agile thing is really good for my career now, because it really, really felt like falling down without any security fence or something. So I can completely sympathize with leaders that are going into the direction, and I was being forced to go in this direction. There was no way back for me. I was stuck in this agile pilot team, so everybody was looking at me acting agile. If there was not this high attention at that point, I can imagine I would probably also would have swapped back to my old behavior and kind of pretended to work agile, but not really acting on the principles. And the good thing was this coach was pushing us and also forcing me to change behavior. And it took us probably 3 months. We went through 4 or 5 sprints, and then suddenly our behavior changed. We recognized that this agile working was really adding benefits. Our work became more transparent. We were reducing waste. We became intrinsically motivated just by seeing the progress of our work very transparently. And also then when the coach pulled back and I was not jumping back into my classical leadership behavior anymore, suddenly the team really started to work self-organized. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they started to really more or less get into this flow. And this was for me the biggest aha effect, that it's really working. And I could really now find this new role as an agile leader without pushing the team all the time and micromanaging. And it was a long story made short, completely right. It's extremely tough for management to go in this direction. And it comes down to really being very disciplined in the agile methodologies, which are suitable to the C-suite or management, but then really being coached and really being forced to do it right. And then after a while, you've learned it and then you can do it on your own.
I very like that story that you shared because it so directly shows what happens with all of us. And I think every leader listening to the podcast can ask himself if he would react the same way you did to say, well, let's continue, even it may mean that I lose my, let's say, leadership position. And like you also mentioned very well, I guess, is that change hurts. It needs to hurt so that you really start to change. Otherwise, I always also compare it with stop smoking. I mean, the first weeks of stop smoking is hurting. It doesn't make fun, of course. And I think only after having surpassed this phase of it hurts, it doesn't make fun, and to keep going is on all this change process, I think, a very important phase.
Yeah. And I think to add some more complexity, I mean, we've now talked about the single individual's feelings, like the teammates that certainly have some experiences, the leaders themselves. It gets even more complex when you look into the combination of both. And that's also kind of an interesting observation I did. There are different constellations of leaders and teams in this transformation. And I perceive or observe different paces of adaptation to this new leadership style, a new working style. Yeah, some leaders are quite eager. They start to adapt to these agile leadership roles. But on the other hand, it can be that the team is not really going into this agile direction. Probably they're quite fine being micromanaged. So they actually don't want to don't want to be responsible or take charge for anything. And in this case, there's kind of like a power vacuum which is happening. This leader is kind of going in the servant leadership style and is rather providing inspirational vision, but it's not micromanaging anymore. And teams, if they are not then really catching up and taking over this responsibility, can completely fall into anarchy. And something what can happen then, either the team leader goes back to this transactional leadership style and starts micromanaging again to avoid the team from having a lower performance. Or what also sometimes happens, if the leader is really ambitious and tries to push further in the agile direction, I've seen sometimes in the team, suddenly somebody stepping in the first row and acting as the new informal leader. It's sometimes the case, maybe somebody's quite ambitious and wants anyway to take the next role. And in this situation, you also then really have to intervene because the leader in the end will be completely irrelevant and the team will be managed by somebody else. But it can also be the way around that the leader is actually maybe not adapting to the leadership style, and the team is much more ambitious and wants to work agile. And there you have the same thing. It's like a culture clash you have, where the team is kind of working self-organized and doesn't want to be micromanaged anymore. But the leader on the other end is pushing for his command and control. And there's also a lot of friction happening. And I think in this complexity, it becomes then really interesting when you look into a whole organization, because then you have different angles of anxieties and frictions you have to then mediate as a coach. And I think this is then also when you look, especially in more scaled frameworks where multiple levels in an organization are supposed to work agile, where you really have to be cautious to have enough coaching capacity to then really also mediate and escalate these different frictions which are happening on all levels. That can be quite a cumbersome start in the beginning.
I very like the observation, and I feel so much connected with what you mentioned because I mean, there are, of course, many team members would call, yes, we love it. Well, let's show that leaders are not required. But it means also that there are, let's say, it's there's also a change in power. So it means the power goes, and it also means that that you as a team member also need to behave and react according to the power that has given to you. So when you start, let's say, your consulting or coaching projects, how do you, let's say, check, or how do you take also the whole team within that journey, which is always difficult, right? I mean, let's not talk about the whole organization, but let's start with a team. I've seen that also quite difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are different ways to approach this, and I think you have to do this very situational, depending on the context. I think that the biggest mistake you need to avoid is kind of this agile theater where where it's looking like everybody's working agile. Everybody suddenly putting post-its on the wall, and you have like stand-up meetings, and people call themselves product owners, and everybody's wearing sneakers and talking to everybody in a first name. Yeah. But when you scratch a little bit on the surface, you see, wow, actually nobody is changing anything on their working style. The leaders are doing exactly the same like before. They're micromanaging and exactly assigning tasks to people, and people are executing those. Yeah, this is also something. The agile framework itself doesn't really change how people are working. There's a couple of things you have to do more. That's exactly what your question was targeting to. And what helps a lot is to come up really with a very, very clear role definition and kind of like a governance list, which is extremely clearly defining the new roles. The biggest mistake you can do is like putting people with their existing roles into an agile team and expect that this will work. Because like you said, there's a couple of things people suddenly have to do in a different way. And I think in the end, it comes down to be very transparent and clear, and you can define those new roles and governance together with a team, but you have to have a contracting more or less and a commitment that this is what they want to do. And everybody is really 100% convinced that we want to try this out at least. And what I've done a couple of times before we actually go into daily working with this framework, that I start role playing these roles. So I do like staged stand-ups, and where I do exaggerated role plays, where I do like escalation topics or something like this, where I force these different roles to act upon what they are now supposed to do, to show them how the extreme situations can look like. And maybe I'm then also taking one of the roles and challenging a little bit one or the other, but not to maybe create an uncomfortable situation, but really show people what they are now supposed to do. And I think it's much more easy for people to imitate a certain behavior when they have seen how it's supposed to be, than just reading it through theoretically, understanding it, but having then struggles to really act upon those new rules in their daily life. And I think these role plays are a nice, playful thing you can do in a kind of workshop style. But then in daily life, you definitely need also the coaching or supervision from a corner, where a coach can then also support one or the other in his or her role to really live up to the new principles. And this is, again, we had this analogy with sport. This is something you have to train. Yeah, it's like going to the gym. If you want to have a six pack, you have to go for half a year to the gym and do very, very strict exercises and go beyond your pain, more or less. And it's exactly the same with these roles. You have to train it. You have to be disciplined. In the beginning, it's hurting. After a while, you see your first results. You probably get motivated by that, and then you go further. And that's exactly the same flow how coaching works in this manner.
So I'm asking myself, is there maybe something also where we should start before people goes into such roles and positions? So meaning already at university level or school level to train people those methods, because I mean, we know it from ourselves, right? The later in the maturity or age level we are, the harder it gets really to change. And I mean, at university, at least if I remember back, you get trained, let's say, the classical management methods, right? So do you think there should be also some change happening there?
I mean, it definitely makes sense to train certain methodologies, but again, I said this before, I don't think that you can train a certain behavior or mindset. So knowing about those new leadership styles or this new methodology certainly helps. It probably creates a certain openness to try it out. But to be very frank, when I trained teams in working agile, the youngsters, the younger colleagues, the hipsters in the team who looked like, wow, those will be agile right away, those had the most problems. Not because they were not open to do it, but they were just too inexperienced. They were just too young and they were such greenhorns. They were not able to take over the responsibility and take charge. They would have liked to do it. But you recognize quite quickly, wow, those guys have to stay in the second row. If you want to have a self-organized team, you need an expert team. You need experienced people who are able to take over responsibility. And that's quite nice, because I had a lot of teams where you thought in the beginning, wow, those old guys there, they look really like they have worked in a corporation like 30 years. You won't change their mindset in any way. And those were the guys who picked up agile quite quickly, because they appreciated that they suddenly could decide things. They were experts in their field of function. And they appreciate this new way of working, because they were completely comfortable to take decisions, because they had this big experience just from the years in their position. And this was quite nicely to see that this image of agile, which is kind of looking like the new hipster thing in companies and everybody's wearing sneakers, if you really boil it down to the essence, it's about giving the experts who have been in the company for 30 years, giving them the leeway to do what's right. Yeah, this was a quite nice twist. Also in the acceptance of agile working, because if you don't call it agile or Scrum or whatsoever anymore, it's more or less giving the people who know exactly what to do the right and the mandate to do that, and the trust, more or less, to act as experts. And I like that much more. And when you start introducing agile to a company which is probably a little bit skeptic, I like to bring it down to this essence and explain people what it's actually about. And I think this is also something which is quite important to motivate people then in the existing personnel to try it out. And I think in most of the cases, if they jump into cold water, I've actually seen that everybody was completely enthusiastic because they experience really what they actually want to do. Right? So everybody wants to be appreciated for what they know and what they can do.
I think this is a very important statement, right? That you need to be really a solid expert to really, let's say, make use of the power that has given to you to make the right decisions and make the right moves. Now, coming back to the topic of, let's say, the journey or development of individuals, if you look back at your journey, when you have started your career, what would have been the advice that you would have give the younger Daniel starting his leadership career?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I was thinking about this a little bit. You told me you're going to ask these questions. I don't have a perfect answer to that. So I'm still kind of now in freestyle mode. But I think that's good. That's what it's supposed to be. To be very honest, I mean, when you're still working in a corporation, there's still kind of rules you can't change. How to climb up a career ladder. This depends on certain things. And I mean, I worked most of my working life in kind of that organizations. And at a certain point, you get brainwashed. You start following those rules. You have to have a sponsor. You have to have this and that functions or job rotations done that you can go up the career ladder. So you kind of follow this blueprint, which is given to you to have a career in such a corporation. And I followed that. I was quite successful. I was still climbing up the ladder. But now looking back, I see that I did some things which I was forced to do, which brought me up the career ladder, but which were probably not really my strength or my fields where I really have competences or talents. And if I was younger, I would definitely encourage myself to look much more to work in fields which I really want to work in, where I see my talent being on a fruitful ground, not just appreciated, but really something where my talents are needed, and not just doing that what you need to do to climb up the career ladder. So it's probably quite simple recommendation, but I see this now. I'm now slightly above 40, and you ask yourself then as well, okay, you can go this track further, or do you now want to change something? And I'm definitely on the second point that I want to change something. It's not about climbing up the career ladder. It's about doing something meaningful to yourself. I don't want to call the word purpose now, but you can only be good if you do something that you really like. And I think in every organization, especially when it's opening up to agile working, these opportunities get bigger and bigger. And if I would have known that I'm working in such an environment when I'm 40, I would have not given a about following those rules, but really been much more bolder in doing things that I wanted to do, and maybe would have been exactly the same place like I'm now. So don't be too humble to just being pushed around and do what the people expect from you. Also be quite bold and ask for things you want to do.
Go4Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
I love it, Daniel. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Welcome. Had a lot of fun. Thank you, Daniel.
Go4Leadership, the